you are joining the 3Cs again for another episode. As you'll see on the screen, the lovely Sara is with us as usual, and myself, Emma. And today we're joined by the fabulous Sumi. I believe Sara is going to do a quick introduction because you have a little bit more history of knowing each other.
Good morning and welcome. We have Dr. Sumi Chatterjee, GP from the Bradford area, who has great interests in musculoskeletal medicine and holistic therapies. Do you want to tell us a little
Big
bit
word.
about your too big a word this time? Tell us your background and your work, Sumi.
Okay, well, hi there, everyone. And first of all, thank you both so much for having me join you both. It's a great privilege, and I always feel very honoured to be in the presence of such greatness as you both.
Oh, flattery, I love it.
It's good, isn't it? Not bad for a Monday morning. Anyway, yes, my name is, as I said, Dr. Sumi Chatterjee, and I actually work as a GP. I've been a GP for nearly 15 years now, and I've been working in the Bradford area. My sort of expertise is musculoskeletal medicine, which is a big word, Sara, and it's basically to do with joints and chronic pain and rheumatology and sort of orthopedics. So it's quite a big area. So I normally work as a locum GP, so I go and go to different practices and work there. But in terms of my musculoskeletal work, it's all NHS. So with my musculoskeletal work, I do sort of extended clinics, which is a bit more specialist, and have close links with the orthopedic team, the rheumatology team, and the physiotherapists, who I think are fabulous. And I'd be lost without the physios. So yeah, definitely. So really enjoy my job. And but obviously there's been some great changes in recent months, as everyone can properly appreciate.
Thank you for that, Sumi. So at the moment, we're all in a pandemic. A lot of us are shielding, and it's been, well, I think I'm on week 8, and that's taken its toll on a lot of people. How is that affecting how you work in terms of assessing patients?
That's a really good question, Sara. Actually, I've been quite worried at work because originally when I first started, obviously we had to get our personal protection and all of that kind of stuff, and patients were very anxious and worried about access, and obviously as the government's guideline became a bit more clearer and lockdown then ensued, what we found is that people were advised obviously to come in only when necessary and for serious conditions. But what we found is that people, I think, are so overwhelmed with fear that the actual people seeking help is reduced quite dramatically, and quite worryingly so. Certainly for patients who have been referred, say, for potential cancer diagnoses, and then patients who have a diagnosis of cancer who should be attending their outpatient clinic appointments or having some contact with the doctor, either via the phone or anything. Just generally people are not coming as much as they should be, and I've even found that with my work in general practice, I'm not seeing as much, and the work, certainly my musculoskeletal clinics, that's getting less as well. So it's quite a worrying trend actually, and I'm just hoping that people can realize that it's still so important. It's even more important now that people attend their GP practices if they're worried about their health, because I think the problem is obviously COVID in itself is a terrible pandemic, and what it's done to our country and the number of people that have suffered. But what we don't want is more people, more casualties from the COVID that are inadvertently suffering because they haven't come to see their doctors, come to get that help. So I think it's really critical that people realize that all the that we've got all the safety in place. Really, what we just need them to do is come if they're concerned and almost carry on as normal, because when it comes to their health, that's priority, and if they have any worries, they must come and see us.
So myself and Emma have seen a lot of anxious patients that have had previous cancer diagnoses, and we're encouraging them that if anything has changed, any symptoms, be it visual, be it in their energy levels, it's a fine line between understanding the new kind of fatigue with having to use all our different senses to communicate through technology, we're in Mental Health Awareness Week, and it does worry me that a lot of people are regressing based on previous traumas, be that a cancer diagnosis, losing someone close recently. And I'm struggling with how we can all reach out and encourage each other to mentally digest what is going on. What kind of tips or therapies would you suggest we need to probably share and look into?
I think that's, again, a really pertinent question, Sarah. I think really the importance, I would say to people, is the importance of having a routine, first of all, because obviously our routine has been taken away from us. You know, we are creatures of routine. And I think when the routine is taken away, then people start to almost lose it's the routine's like a framework, so you can hang things on. And sometimes, you know, when the days are ahead of you and it's so overwhelming, sometimes to even break that day up into little sections, you know. I was laughing with one of my friends the other day. We were talking about our favorite films, and she was saying how much she loved that Hugh Grant movie, what's it called, About a Boy, and how Hugh Grant does everything in little sections, you know. So there's like one unit, so one unit is 15 minutes, and how they do things, you know. And I thought, actually, that's a really, and she says, I said, so how many units are you going to spend on your gardening? She said 1 unit. And I said, what about watching The Crown? She went, maybe 8 units. I said, okay, we've got a difference here in terms of, so I think, sort of setting that humor aside, I think that's in itself, it's a very good metaphor for actually having some kind of routine. So for example, I have a really nice sort of mnemonic that I created for my patients and for my friends and my colleagues, but I called it My Nests, and it's a really nice little framework to hang things on, just so that you are aware of what you need to make sure that you achieve in terms of your everyday requirements. So I call it My Nests. And it's basically M stand, and basically the My Nest is like a metaphor for if you sort of feather your nest, you can fly high. So M is for the mind. So as you said, Sarah, the mind is really crucial. So mind is, it's how you think is how your body will behave. So for example, if you feel that you are under threat, then your body's physiology will respond accordingly. So we have what we call the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. And I can explain that to your listeners just to make it a bit easier. So for example, the sympathetic nervous system is if you are in a situation where you feel you're under threat, then the body will start to create, when the body senses that from the brain, it starts to create things like adrenaline and cortisol. So it's getting you ready to fight or fly away from this saber-toothed tiger or whatever is facing you. And then then what happens is once you're back in the cave with your friends and you're like, yeah, this is great, I slayed the saber-toothed tiger, and you're relaxing, then your parasympathetic nervous system kicks in, and that's your rest and digest. Yeah, so that sort of really relaxes you and really important. So that's what the parasympathetic does. Now the problem is, obviously, in modern life, our bodies are very much, ideally you should have a nice sort of, swing from the parasympathetic to the sympathetic, and that allows us to function. And sympathetic, even though it's fight and flight, is very important because it's the nervous system that gets out of bed, gets us doing stuff. But obviously the problem is with modern life, our brains are constantly perceiving that we are in danger, and subsequently our bodies are constantly in sympathetic overload, which is very overwhelming for the body. So we need to learn how to hack into our parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest. And the way we do that is through the breath. The breath is one of the most easiest ways to hack into that. And so I get my patients, and just even simple things like doing what we call square breath, or maybe where you basically inhale for a count of 4, you hold for a count of 4, you exhale for a count of 4, and then you hold for a count of 4. So you do maybe 5 or 6 cycles of that. And what that does is then that triggers your parasympathetic, your rest and digest, to relax you and rest you down a bit. And interestingly, practices like yoga and qigong, they actually use use the breath. So the breath is actually very integral to all of these practices. So it's quite interesting that actually that in itself is, and sometimes people get quite concerned saying, oh, I'm not flexible, I can't do yoga. But I say, you can breathe, right? And they say, yeah, I think I can breathe. Well, then that's fine. You could do yoga, just sitting there and just being in yourself, doing your breath. And you can extend your breath, sorry, Sarah, to a 4-6 breath or a 4-8 breath. So we inhale for a count of 4 and you exhale for a count of 6 or 8.
So actually what you're saying is, instead of me trying to find a saber-toothed tiger to run away from, or going out and battling with a saber-toothed tiger, I can actually just be quite calm and breathe, and that will achieve the same thing.
Absolutely. I mean, as I said, the saber-toothed tiger response is important because obviously if you are faced with danger, and this is a palpable danger where you need to run away from, which obviously we had in our prehistoric times, then obviously it's very important. But then equally, you don't want to be in that situation constantly and all the time, because that is what depletes your adrenaline, can give rise to adrenal fatigue, can give rise to lots of other conditions, and it's very suppressive on your immune system. Your immune system is constantly geared up to fight, and because it's just listening to what the mind is saying. So that's why I always have in that acronym, my nest, I always start with mental health. I mean, I can go for the rest of the acronym if that is helpful, just so that, So as I said, M is for mental health, mind. Y is for your time, your space. So always to give yourself some time to do your own thing. Obviously, when we're leading our busy lives, we sometimes forget ourselves because we're too busy looking after everybody else. And sometimes it's important that even if it's 10-15 minutes, that you have your space. And it might be that, you love going out for that walk, or you might want to go for that, once it's all open, you want to go for that coffee in that cafe, or you want to watch your favorite program, or even you want to go to the movies, when all of that's open, or even see a movie at home, because it's your thing. Some people like knitting, some people like going into the garden. So really knowing what makes you happy and doing that every day a little bit, giving that time to yourself. N stands for nutrition, which I think is really important. Obviously, we're going to be talking about that soon. E, and then there's a silent H between nests, so it's NHEST. H is for your hydration. It's so important that you keep well hydrated. And sometimes we can feel tired if we're not drinking enough fluid. Sometimes we can feel hungry and we keep eating lots of food and we think we're still hungry. It's because you're probably, you're probably dehydrated and you need to drink. And then E is for exercise. Physical activity, so important, especially in this time. S is for your sleep, so important to have a good night's sleep. And TS is for talk to someone, which I think is so important, especially now. And we're very lucky with technology that we can access and speak to each other. But equally, I think maybe even having a routine for that as well, because it can be quite overwhelming. I remember when we first started, the number of Zoom chats and, podcasts and webinars and all this way to connect with people. And I thought, my goodness me, this is harder than actually being out there face to face with people. And so I've now had to be very strict and said to everybody, look, on Friday night, I see this, these friends. On Saturday night, I have a disco, like a virtual disco, which is great. And then on Sunday, I do this, where we discuss the program.
I've been part of one of those.
Yeah, they're really good. we had a Eurovision one this Saturday, which was really cool. So I think it's really, and these are important. These are like your frameworks, your hooks for which you can, hang good health on, basically, because you need these to feel okay. So this is things that are essential. They're not then sort of non-negotiable. So to drink, to eat properly, to sleep, to exercise, these are not things that, oh, do I feel like doing that today? They're non-negotiable. You need to do those to keep you okay. And then anything on top of that is a bonus. Does that make sense? Because that keeps your mental, physical health, your body, mind and emotions, spirit, all of that together. And I think you need to see yourself as a whole. It's not just the mind is something separate from the body. They're all connected, and that's the big thing.
It's quite powerful, Sumi, because I'm very conscious, like you, of using Zoom or using all these different packages, all this new IT. Initially, I think we're all like, yay, we can keep connected with Zoom, we can see our friends, our family. But then people have stepped back from it and thought, "Do you know what, it's not the real thing. It's almost forced because we haven't had the same routine. So we haven't had the same things to talk about, and there's been some dead space."
Yeah.
But
Yes.
then times when we've really wanted to stay in touch, we've not had internet connections, and people have thought, what's happening with them? They've not replied. Are they ill? People fear the worst because they're not automatically in touch. So I'm very conscious of like the magnetic field thing and sleep hygiene, because I'm finding my mind is on overload trying to stay in touch with people. With teleconferencing is the big one with my support group, where you can have up to 49 people. Not that I'd wish that on anyone on one call.
That's a lot.
And we talk twice a week about issues that are going on for people, fearful of going to an appointment, how to break that down, how to use technology like recording with permission of a GP what is actually said on their phone so they can digest it, listen to it later with a family member, or have that video conferencing in their own home so they've got the support of a family member. We're kind of trying to break things down to not be a negative, that they can't have someone go with them to an appointment. They can have someone with them in their own home, and virtual could possibly be the future way of doing appointments as well. I mean, what are your thoughts around the sleep hygiene? Because I think we're all having less hours at the moment.
I think that's I think first of all the work you're doing, Sara, is incredible, and it's so nice to know that there are people like you and creating these really amazing sort of communities of support and love. And I think that's really important in this time, and simple advice like recording what the doctor's saying to you, because it is very overwhelming. And you're absolutely right about these Zoom and all these meetings. And I think one needs to really have some boundaries around that, because I think that that's very important. Because the problem is, I think a lot of people are struggling because of the lack of routine and the fact that people can just access you whenever. And I think this is one of my major sort of theories to why we're having such an increase in mental ill health generally in everything, just because of the fact that we are so easily accessible. Even before this pandemic, we have become so easily accessible. In the olden days, and not wanting to sound old here, but in the olden days, when you went home at work, from work, whatever time, 5, 6, 7, that was basically it. And people would never ring, your work people would never ring you on the phone, your landline, because that's your time. But now people are, I can text her and, she'll respond to it when she wants to. But people don't realize that when they send you something, it's almost like you're a little bit obliged to have let me just have a quick little look and see what's going on and stuff. So I think I try and have boundaries. And like, for example, yesterday, that boundary was not met. And subsequently, I didn't have like the best night's sleep. But I find that if my boundary of not having any technology after 6 o'clock, 7 at a push, but really no more technology, is a really good thing. And if you say that to all your loved ones and say, look, I love you guys very much, but for my own well-being, for your own well-being, I'm saying it for you as well, I think we should just not have any technology after 6, 7 o'clock. So you're setting that boundary, you're explaining about the boundary so that people understand, so they don't start panicking when they can't get. Obviously you have to have a thing that if it's an emergency, then that's fine, fair enough, call me on my phone so I can hear it. But otherwise, or call me on my landline, give them another number, but otherwise don't sort of step that boundary. Because the thing is, a lot of research has shown now that the internet actually releases, when you're actually on your sort of either your iPad or your phone, it releases something called blue light, and that can actually really interfere with your sleep pattern. So this is a massive area of research now, and people say that you can buy various glasses to try and block that blue light, but ideally trying to avoid technology is really important for that, one of those reasons, because it really does. And I've done this as a study on myself, and I've noticed that obviously I'm doing a lot of online courses at the moment, and some of them do come on a bit later for me, say between 8 and 9. So what I try and do is I put the thing on, but I try not to look at the screen, and I go off on the other side, just write notes like old-fashioned writing. Normally I like to write directly onto my computer screen, but I find that trying to avoid that, because and I find that the days when I have looked into the screen, my sleep is of, even though I might go to bed at the same time, it's of a poorer quality. So if that's one thing that your listeners can do, would be really helpful for them.
I think I mean, I always try to take positives out of any situation. And one of the things that I've noticed, I'm adapting my life. Like normally I'm working like 7 days a week doing something. So it's not necessarily a paid clinic, but I might be doing something like pitch side football. But it's still time out of my day. And this pandemic and the lockdown, I've become a little bit more structured with my day. So a Sunday, I don't have any social media. It's just, I don't touch my phone. I don't look at it. Anyone who needs me has got my landline. And I'm very, very strict with that now. So I make sure that what I've got is, a full day where I don't do anything. And then what I try to do on a night is, like you say, have a cutoff point, and I don't look at my phone. And I make, unless it's an emergency, then that's it. Because otherwise, I find, exactly like you said, it doesn't really help my sleep. But a huge amount of more technology, because normally I'm away from a screen, I'm not looking at it, I'm treating patients physically, so there's no kind of technology there that I'm staring at on a daily basis. I found myself much more tired because, like yourself, I'm doing a lot of courses online, I'm doing a lot more interaction online, and I'm finding myself more tired because of that. So people who have to sit on a computer all day every day, I don't know how they do that.
Yeah.
That's
and you know what you're saying is so true. It is. I think there is without a doubt some detriment, serious detriment, because you are having, and it is hard because as humans, we automatically read each other. We read each other's reactions to what we're saying, and it's much harder to try and perceive that on a screen, because you can see people's, and we are creatures that that's very important to us, and we're not getting that feedback, and we're having to really focus in on the screen, going, is she smiling at that comment, or is she shaking her head, or have I just said something that's upset someone? And you just, and it's really hard because you've got that internal dialogue going on, then you've got the dialogue that you're obviously talking with people, and everybody else has got their internal dialogue, so no wonder everyone's so exhausted. And I think so I've been, by purpose, when I've been doing these meetings, been nodding my head like this, like extra nodding, but then that's tiring for me, because I'm like trying to really show my emotions that yes, I agree, and oh, that's terrible. And you can't hug somebody, and when your friends are like crying and you're like, oh, you're like, oh, and you're trying to touch the screen, and you just think, God, this is just so hard, so I really, really feel what, and I completely get it, because we're all living it. And I guess that's the comfort of this situation, is that we're all in the same boat. And I think in that sense, it gives us a lot of strength, because usually when people have got mental health issues or whatever, they sometimes feel very alone, and they feel that they're the only one. And I think in this situation, people, know that everybody is, and obviously people will be dealing with it differently, and some days will be fine, but other days will be a wobbly day, but that's okay, and I think it's to be kind to yourself, and not to say, oh gosh, look at this, this is rubbish, why haven't I done this today? Because we are human at the end of the day, and we do have our biological clock, and we do have these rhythms, and I think that's why our bodies, rhythm is routine is so important, and just having, and people might say, well, how do I do that? I say, well, maybe, what time do you wake up? Try and go to bed at the same time, wake up at the same time, and have like a bedtime routine. So my body now knows that, by 9 o'clock it starts to yawn and everything. And I know that even if I want to watch that movie, I'm not going to start watching it, because then I'm going to be up till 11:30 and really tired. So then I'll get my tea, and then I'll just I'll watch something that's 20 minutes lighthearted, nothing too sort of overwhelming, because as you find you get older as well, things affect you more, like I remember when I was younger, I could watch all sorts of things and it wouldn't bother me. But now if I watch something that's even slightly disturbing, I go, when I go to sleep in the morning when I'm dreaming, that's incorporated into my dreams. So you realize, and obviously we're all very different and we have different sensitivities. But I think to be really respectful to your body, the body's a very intelligent being, you know. And I think your body tells you things, and I think it's really important to listen to your bodies. You know, your body knows when something's not right, and usually if you're having a racing mind, that is usually a result of the fact that you have no sort of fixed idea or routine, and that's what you need to fix to then calm the mind down and give yourself some stability.
We've actually had a comment on the sort of subject of sleep from Robbo. He's put he's having a lot of stress recently, and he's found that his sleep is either a lot and he sleeps in, or he's not having enough. Is there any sort of tips for maybe balancing that out?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I mean, really, I think first of all, we have to establish that, you know, people have a fixed idea of what is the right amount of sleep, and really 8 hours to a degree is a myth, in the sense of people can vary. And what I've noticed in my clinical practice is that people can vary from needing anything between 6.5 to about eight, you know, hours, which I think is probably the optimum. That's probably, if you're in that range somewhere, then I think that's good. I mean, you know, the problem is, you know, when people say about insomnia and the fact they're not sleeping properly, it is pretty much a 24-hour disorder, because it also affects your daytime activity as well. So it can have a negative effect on that. And also what people tend to find is they sometimes get anxiety around sleep, before they go to say, am I going to get to sleep? And because they're thinking like that, that puts more pressure on them. So I know it's difficult, but I think it's almost like you've got to try and almost get that sleep hygiene routine, in, and make sure you're going to bed pretty much the same time every evening and waking up at the same time. Even if you haven't had a good night's sleep, you still wake up. Because I think the worst thing you can do, because it's like training a puppy or something, you have to get that routine. And it might be really difficult initially, but if you wake up and you haven't slept that well, the next night, because you're so tired, then you'll sleep. Does that make sense? Otherwise, you're constantly almost, it's like chasing your tail. So, for example, for me, I tend to go to bed around 10:30. And I always play like a meditation before I go to bed. And I do something called Yoga Nidra, which is really, really useful, actually. And it's basically a process. It's all what we call progressive muscle relaxation, basically, where so I basically at myself, I say, right, tighten your right foot and then release it, rotate your right ankle and then release, tighten the right leg and then release, and then feel that tightness go across the pelvis, tighten your buttock muscles and then release, and then do the same on the left leg, and then you go all the way up through the body. And then what you do is you think about 3 things that you're grateful for that day, because gratitude has also been found to be very helpful for your mental health as well. And then I imagine 3 things I'm grateful for, and then I imagine that as a light going into my body and then relaxing all my muscles. And I never get to that point because I've already gone to sleep by then. I think I get to my left leg, tightening my left leg, and then I don't remember anything. So, and before I would be getting through the whole thing, and it says you should try and get through the whole thing before you go to sleep, but it really never happens quite like that if I'm really tired. But as soon as I've got something on my mind, like if I've had some assignment that needs to be in, that does affect your sleep. You know, it'll be in my, and so I think, you know, we think of, it's interesting because I'm studying traditional Indian medicine at the moment called Ayurveda. So it's traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda. Very interesting because as an integrative doctor, because that is obviously what my area of expertise is now, and this is something I've recently qualified in, we look at all the different sort of traditional and complementary sort of approaches, as well as conventional. So of course I'm a conventional doctor, but I really believe in what we call a holistic thing in a patient. And it's really interesting because of my Ayurvedic studies, and you've got to remember Ayurveda is probably the oldest form of medicine that's been around. It's about 10,000 years old, you know, and they observed the human body and observed our reactions, and they've basically put people into 3 different kind of constitutions. So it's almost like you can tell what that person's going to be like by certain features, by the way, and you can almost tell how they're going to think as well, because we all have certain sort of like the way we're built, you know, and it's to do with the energy and the constitution. But what they basically say is that people, you know, that the mind is really not in your head as you think it is. It's a feeling, and you usually feel it in your heart, you know. So for example, if something is worrying you, it's this feeling, you can't describe it, but it's this, you can't point to where it is either. It's just in you. You've just got this bad feeling. I'm sure you've had that before, where you just had, and it's this instinct that you think something's not right, you know. And so in Ayurveda, they say that's actually processed by 72,000 channels in the body, which are actually transmitting all the energy. And when you think about all the energy kind of therapies that there are out there, things like Reiki and even if you think about your heart, the fact the heart generates its own energy, its own beat, you know, and people have an energy about them, and a lot of research is going into this actually in terms of molecular physics and stuff, looking at the energy of human beings. And when you look at traditional Chinese medicine, for example, when they use things like acupuncture, we're talking about Eastern acupuncture, a lot of it is because they're saying that the energy's got stuck in an area, and that's where illness and disease can manifest. So they put in acupuncture needles to release that energy. So, you know, you have to have, you know, a real sort of a respect and insight. I mean, obviously the wording that they use, they have a much more wider way of describing it. So it's sometimes very difficult to translate it into English, because sometimes the word might not be there. But they were saying that in Ayurveda, it's like 72,000 channels, or nadis they call. And actually, when you think about it, we define people by their energy. So, you know, sometimes you might meet somebody and you might think, I don't know, I'm not sure about that person. You know, there's something, and you can't put your finger on it, but it's just that you think there's, you know, or somebody might come and say, oh, I really like that person, I love their energy and how they are. I mean, you can't describe that or put a scientific sort of thing on it, but it's there, it's that feeling, you know. So I think science is beginning to appreciate this now, because this is, you know, we're not just a bag of organs, you know, and we need the treatment of this, that, the other. We are actually a living, sensing being. And like in Ayurveda, they were saying you sense everything through your senses. So your eyes, what you see, what you hear, what you touch, what you feel, you know, what you taste. And then that gives you your overall feeling for that day. You know, so if, say, somebody said, oh, you're beautiful and I love you, and give you a big hug and made you a gorgeous breakfast, you know, you're probably going to feel great, you know. But if they said, oh, you know, because you've taken that all in through your senses, your body's processed it, and then you're having a physiological reaction to that.
Sumi, my first experience of Ayurveda was 25 years ago, actually, while I was at university, and I was studying hard and working simultaneously. And one of my tutors said to me, I want you to see this chap. And I went to see him. And what I absolutely loved about the prescription that he gave me was that he said I had to spend so many hours a week by running water. And I thought, well, that's brilliant, because I naturally, when I was stressed, when I was younger, I used to take the dog down on the beach and go for a walk, and I automatically felt better. And interestingly, during this lockdown, we've been walking to the canal and the river, and I instantly feel calm. So the prescription of that from him was intuitive, but also, like you said, very holistic. It was more than just about giving me a pill, which is fabulous, but I've taken that and I've adopted that. So I know that if I go to a river, I will feel calmer. And it's something that I'm aware of. And I think there's always something for somebody that will help them externally feel calmer internally.
Absolutely. And I think that's a beautiful story. And thank you for sharing that with us. But I think in Ayurveda, because basically what Ayurveda is saying is that, you know, you have that intelligence, you know, it's just, you know, it's simple, it's obvious, but sometimes you need it to be someone to sort of highlight it for you, because your body has all its ability to heal itself, but you just need to give it the right conditions and the right. And yes, conventional medicine, obviously I'm a conventional doctor, so I am a scientist at the end of the day, and that's what I've trained in. But equally, what I see is that does make sense, because everybody has that belief in the body's ability to heal, because even a surgeon wouldn't cut into you if they didn't think that your skin and your muscle and your bone would heal, you know, because how does that happen? How does the body know that it's got to heal that? I mean, you know, the body is phenomenal. And also, I think the fact that we are very much interconnected with nature. And I think that is another thing that's coming, and it's becoming more visible, that, you know, now I see people, and it's lovely to see people actually not on their phones anymore. They're actually looking around going, and people are walking around with their cameras and their binoculars. And, you know, it's so wonderful to see that, because I think once you do go into nature, you do feel so much better. Like yesterday, for the first time, I nearly cried. I went to Roundhay Park, and it was so beautiful to see the leaves and the trees, and I was nearly in tears, because it was just so nice to be back, because when you don't have access to gardens and stuff like that. And normally I love going and seeing the flowers, and like you, Emma, I love running. I was born by the sea, and I really miss going home to see my family who live by the sea at the very, but I know one day, hopefully when things improve, then I will. But I noticed that, because to me, I like that great expanse, that sort of feeling of freedom. And I think everybody has a unique thing that's important to them, and I think they know that. So you are your own best doctor. Conventional medicine is fantastic for infections, it's great for surgery, but really conventional medicine is more focusing on the downstream effects of ill health. What we need to do is look upstream and try and keep ourselves well. And this is why I think even during this COVID pandemic, what I'm saying to people is really, let's focus on trying to create some resilience in ourselves, on our immune systems. So those my nests are really core to keeping yourself well, because you cannot control what the virus is doing, but what you can control is what's going on inside of you. So if God forbid you are faced with this virus, you want to be able to put up that best fight possible. So the only way you can do that is to reinforce your own body and get it strong.
I'm really with you on this one, Sumi, because a healthy immune system means you're better equipped to deal with anything thrown at you.
Absolutely.
And what we see in the media is very much about national figures. It doesn't actually pin down to what's happening at local level. And there is some really amazing work going on in different hospitals with various therapists. I'm seeing people like the international florist, dear friend Jonathan Mosley. He would normally be at Chelsea Flower Show. He would be making some amazing designs. Now he's doing everything virtual and doing classes online. I'm finding with support groups, I'm doing flower arranging and bringing the outdoors in so we can enjoy the colour, the beauty of outside for those that are in a flat and can't get out because they're having to shield. And I think there's something really missing in the media content at the moment, particularly about nutrition and the food we eat. To me, what we should eat is, the things that are different colours to get a good balanced diet, to build up immunity. What are your thoughts around the media at the moment and how helpful or unhelpful it is when we look at nutrition?
I think, Sarah, again, what you're saying, it has really hit a nerve, because first of all, I'm a foodie, so I love food. Okay, so I could talk about food all day. But I think that is such an important thing that you've stated there, because I really feel, with all respect to, I know the government are doing an extremely difficult job. I mean, they didn't get elected to do this. They got elected to do something else. And I think they've suddenly been faced with this pandemic. And obviously they are, sort of looking at the downstream, let's get a vaccine, let's get all of that. And I think that's where the focus is. Fortunately, on the sort of social platforms, there is a lot more focus on nutrition. And as an integrative doctor, as I said, I'm very passionate about one of the first approaches. We learn about 18 approaches on my course and on my diploma. And basically, one of the big things that we learn about, first of all, is food. And food is the foundation to any health. And when you think about Hippocrates, I think back in 460 BC, you see, we're doing all realms of medicine today, Indian medicine, Greek medicine. But Hippocrates said, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. And he was so spot on, because I really think food is so important. And one of the things I think there's a lot of research going on now is into the gut microbiome, which is a massive area of research and really exciting. But they're actually, so basically the gut microbiome is like your bacteria that live in your gut. Okay, now this is a very fascinating area of research. So did you know that 80% of your immune system is actually in your gut? Which I think, I mean, when I found out, I could not believe it. I was like, really? And they say the gut microbiome is approximately 100 trillion microorganisms. So they are really our best friend, okay? But like me, they need feeding. They love food, okay? And what they love is they love a rainbow diet, okay? Because they all have to have different bits from different foods, okay? So one of the things to keep these bacteria happy is you need foods like what we call probiotics, okay? So there's probiotics and prebiotics. So let me just differentiate that because people get a bit confused about that. So probiotics are basically what provide the good bacteria. So sometimes, say for example, you've had a course of antibiotics, what happens is the antibiotics kill bad bacteria, but they also kill your good bacteria. So this is why people can get a lot of diarrhea and lots of issues with their gut. So if anyone ever has antibiotics, I always say take some probiotics to start seeding back the good bacteria into your gut. Okay, so foods that have are rich in probiotics are things like kefir, which is basically like a sort of, you can get it in the milk section. It's like a yogurt with lots of bacteria in it. Fermented foods are very good. Things like sauerkraut, kimchi. I think Emma's getting hungry. She's licking her lips there. And then prebiotics, which are the indigestible fiber. So that's the fiber that basically feed that we can't digest, but that's what those bacteria like to digest. Okay, so it's really interesting because those prebiotics are things like leeks and garlic and onions and asparagus. They're the whole foods. And if you look at all our cooking from all generations, from all over the world, when we all start cooking, we usually start with onions and a bit of celery. That's always the base of a stew or a curry or a soup. And I think that's remarkable that through our own knowledge of our ancestral knowledge, we've gathered that to realize that that's actually what makes your gut stay well, you know? So if you have happy gut, they then secrete anti-inflammatory substances, which then help your immunity. Okay, but also if the gut are in the wrong, if the bacteria are in the wrong place, because you have what we call the small intestine and the large intestine. So the large intestine is at the end of the whole thing. The small intestine is actually large than the large intestine, but I think it's just named in the sense of how big it is in caliber. But basically, the small intestine is about 15-20 feet. It's quite long. Okay, but sometimes what happens is the bacteria from the large intestine, because that's where they sit, and they basically they're the ones that prepare the sort of poo basically at the end. Sometimes they can go back, they can backflow into the small intestine, and then you can get conditions, things known as small intestinal bowel overgrowth or SIBO. And that again, that's another thing in itself, but that can be to do various issues, you know, various problems with the gut not moving as much or other things. But generally speaking, what you're trying to do is get this sort of healthy diet of prebiotics and probiotics. And that's why your rainbow diet is really important. And I say to people that obviously we need to have protein in our diets and unprocessed and ethically sourced if possible. And some people are vegetarian and vegan, then in that case, make sure you have your vegetable-based proteins, your beans and lentils. Really important with your fats to make sure you're increasing your omega-3s, which are like your oily fish. So things like extra virgin olive oil, avocado oil, nuts, walnuts, cashews, all these things are really, really good. And trying to avoid things like margarine and stuff because they have trans fats and they're processed. So you're really trying to minimize that. And carbohydrates, people forget that plants are carbohydrates, you know, as well. So not having white potatoes, but more sort of sweet potatoes and more plant-based carbohydrates. So whole grains, beans, squash, all of these kind of things. And fiber is basically a type of carbohydrate, as we spoke about before, but we're talking about the indigestible kind of fats and stuff. And people have actually found that to help with your immunity, foods to help immune supportive foods, I would say, are things like bone and vegetable broths. So sometimes people who, might have a roast or something, to take those bones and then boil them in a slow cooker, maybe for 5, 6, 7 hours, you know. And what that does, it releases something called chondroitin and collagen, which actually heal the gut lining and nourish the gut lining. And if you are a vegetarian, then to consider things like shiitake mushrooms. Mushrooms have a powerhouse of really good immune support basically. And to use your spices, you know, we're talking about things like parsley, your herbs, thyme and oregano and ginger and all of these things. They're really, really nutritious. And also to make sure you're having your vitamin D as well. So important, and there are very few reliable food sources of vitamin D, things like fish and full fat dairy, but really trying to maybe have a vitamin D supplement and getting your vitamin D levels checked if you can. But you usually get vitamin D from our sun at the moment. Sometimes you have really lots of sun, sometimes you don't, but that's where you get your vitamin D from.
So we're getting a lot of diet tips there, Sumi, which is really useful for boosting our immunity and looking at nutrients. I'm very conscious that we've talked about the gut and bowels, etc. And the importance here to me really is to get a message out to the outside world that if we notice anything different in our normal bodily habits, if we're talking about breast cancer, prostate cancer, bowel issues, then we certainly need to be reporting these issues into our GPs, don't we?
Absolutely, Sarah. And I think what you've hit on the, hit the nail on the head, because whenever I chat with my patients, I will always ask, have you noticed any change in your bowels or bladder? Have you noticed any loss of weight? Are you passing blood through your back passage? Is it bright red? Is it black? Is there mucus? How are you feeling? What are your energy levels like? Have you lost your appetite? All of these things are really important questions. And if people are noticing that there are physical symptoms that are not normal for them, that it is absolutely paramount that they go and see the doctor to at least discuss it, because it might be something that's nothing to worry about, but they need that reassurance. And I think it's so important that they go and talk these things through with their doctors. Yeah, very important.
Can I just go back a second to what we were talking about with the immune system?
Yeah.
When we're isolating, our own immune system obviously is responsive to outside bacteria and viruses that's constantly working. When we're isolating and we're only working with our own biome and virome, is there an issue there that possibly when we come into contact with somebody, we're possibly not as active, our immune system's not as active as it could be, because the daily contact with those bacteria and viruses that we need has been sort of lost?
That's a very good question. I presume, really, to be fair, we have so much bacteria in our house, on our skin, and in ourselves, just around us. I think the immune system is a really intelligent system, and I think it's got memory. What we have the adaptive and innate immune system. So basically, you have the immune system that immediately reacts, and it's just like firing at everything that's arriving. And then you have the sort of adaptive, which is almost like an arrow. It goes off for a few days, thinks about it, and thinks, right, let's target this, what's coming, and we're going to go for it. So, and then it has that memory. So that's obviously how vaccines work. They have that memory. So I think as long as you are, you're going outside, you're doing your exercise, you're getting that fresh air, you're eating like a varied diet, and you will be exposed. I think it's quite scary when you think of the amount of bacteria that are living on ourselves. I think if we could actually see it, no one would want to touch anybody. And then, oh my goodness, it doesn't matter how clean you think you are, because but we have to have those bacteria because they are part of our being. Yeah. I think the worst thing you can actually do to wipe off this bacteria is nutrition, because they did if you ever get a chance, have a look at Tim Spector's book called The Diet Myth, a fantastic book, where he actually got his son to have fast food for a couple of weeks. And what they did was they measured his microbiome. And it was something like 50%, which is not bad for a teenage boy. So someone who's got a good microbiome is almost like a lush Amazon jungle, but someone whose microbiome is a little bit patchy, who's not, it's almost like a desert with a few shrubs here and there. Okay, so that's how they measure the microbiome. So anyway, they got him to have 2 weeks worth of fast food. What a hardship for a teenager. But anyway, he did it because all in the name of science. And what they found was that his microbiome had gone down to 10% after 2 weeks. And even after trying to have a good diet for 2 years, it's still only gone up to 30%. So this is why you need things like prebiotics and probiotics to keep your gut healthy. And it's so, and the other thing interesting, talking about mental health, they are actually now saying that your dopamine level of dopamine, which is one of the happy neurotransmitters, your serotonin, all of these happy neurotransmitters are actually, a part of them are manufactured in the gut. And depending on the health, those bacteria, now they're showing that there is a definite link between the gut and brain, what they call the gut and brain axis. So the gut bacteria can actually influence how your happy neurotransmitters are produced. So that's phenomenal.
That's interesting, and I know we're here to talk about your expertise today, but I actually wrote a book a few years ago about the correlation between what you eat and your mental health, the symptoms of anxiety, depression, stress, and how your diet will affect positively or negatively on that. So it's something I'm very interested in, definitely.
Yeah, and I think it is an area of research that has been confirmed now. You know, they're just trying to now work out the various bacteria that are involved. And interestingly, chronic pain conditions, when they've mapped the gut bacteria, they've found that there is a specific pattern to people who've got chronic pain. They've got certain bacteria that other people haven't, or they've got more of one bacteria than the other. So this is the kind of level of research that's going in. You know, I mean, I also work like at the National Centre of Integrative Medicine. That's sort of my passion, where I work as a holistic doctor as well. So this is a community interest project where we're trying to help people in terms of you know, working on this. And one of the main things we talk about is in holistic care is that sort of gut health, you know. And I think these books are so important, like to inspect your book. I'm going to go and get your book, Emma. That sounds really interesting. Actually, I'm going to learn a few things from that. But I think it's really important to abide with that. And there's a very good author, actually. She's called Deanna Minch. If you get a chance to have a look at her, she's fantastic. She's a functional medicine doctor. She's also done a lot of training in nutrition, and she talks a lot about this rainbow diet and the fact that it's to do with the phytonutrients rich. And these are phytonutrients are basically chemical compounds that support your immunity, and the diversity of color has different phytonutrients, which is fascinating. And certainly she says that actually for red food, she says that certain food colors have certain roles, which is, I think, amazing. So she said that red foods are actually associated with immune health. So it could be anything from rooibos tea, which is red, to red lentils, and then obviously cranberries, radish, raspberries, all of these things. And they've got things known as, I think they've got a whole array of chemicals, things like anthocyanins, vitamin C, betalains, ellagic acid, fisetin, all of these things which are in red foods specifically. And then I think she said like orange foods are very good for reproductive health, and then yellow foods are very good for digestive health. And I thought, this is amazing. And then obviously, because I'm a yoga teacher as well, I thought this actually correlates with the chakras, which are supposed to be networks of where nerves meet, basically. And you know, obviously down at the bottom is your root chakra. It's your door entry point, so that's your immune system, which I thought was really interesting. And then the sacral chakra is to do with your fertility. And so it's a fascinating area of research again, and it's lovely to have sort of these ancient traditions now being backed up by science, you know. And that's, as a scientist and as a doctor, I feel very excited by that, because obviously I think we need this, and I think we need to really appreciate that it's not just one medicine. We need a whole thing. It's from going from community to you know, to green care, to being out in nature, to doing exercise, to nutrition, to going to what, you know, it should be tailored for that person and their expectations and their way of being.
It's really interesting what you're saying, Sumi, because I think you've given us a colourful breakdown of diet, the rainbow diet in particular, exercise, being kind to ourselves and having time out, the underlying message that if we see something that's different to the norm for us, be it behavioural changes in our body and how it reacts, or symptomatic, to not be afraid to feed that in, be it around mental health, be it around stress and anxiety, or indeed the fear of cancer. The integrative medicine really is something I think we'd like to come back to and chat with you again. I'm very conscious that we've literally got a couple of minutes to wrap up, and we've talked about freedom and liberty in the past. We're in a lockdown situation. Can you, in just a couple of sentences, say how we can flip the coin from being negative and feeling locked up and caged to being positive and looking at freedom and liberty?
I think that's a really beautiful question. I mean, funnily enough, I think at the beginning, I think we were talking about this before, Sara, at the beginning of the lockdown, I was contemplating liberty and captivity as concepts. And I was thinking that it's interesting, there are so many statues of liberty around, and we've almost taken our liberty for granted. But I thought, actually, what we have is, to me, I actually see it as liberty now, because we are at liberty to really find out about ourselves, which we've never had the opportunity to, because we're always so busy doing this, that, the other. And I think this is an ideal chance to have that liberty of finding out about yourself what works for you, finding that routine that you can then carry through when you are then back out in the world, you know. And I think the thing is, if you feel yourself in captivity, then your body will respond like that. As I said, your mind is a scribe for your body. So what your mind thinks, your body will follow. Yeah. So I think that's very powerful.
Period. It's a wake-up call, is what you're trying to say, to think about the future after COVID, what
Absolutely.
bits you're going to retain in your life, what bits are energy zappers, and move those out of your life, and reset boundaries, reprioritize, and be kind to yourself in Mindful Awareness Week. It's a wake-up call to reach out to others and be kind. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. And I think what you both are doing is remarkable, and I think it's incredible, and it's so lovely to know that the planet has people like you who are making this big difference. And I think it's that sense of community. I love the fact how everyone has come together and everyone is really trying to help each other, and we haven't seen that for a long time, you know. And I think I know there are some tragedies happening, but equally there is that massive silver lining that people are really beginning to see each other, like really see each other, you know, really, even though I know we can't see each other that well on Zoom or whatever, but we sense each other, we feel each other, you know, and that is seeing when you feel that other person.
What I'd love to do is thank you from the bottom of our hearts for taking time out today to share your medical experience mixed with the East and Western holistic therapies. I think there's a lot we can all learn. We'd like to share this obviously with Cancer Alliances and other groups and keep you in touch with what's going on. Would you be happy to come back again?
Of course I will. And I guess I didn't tell your listeners, I am a cancer, you know, I've had cancer in the past myself. So I really get it, you know, and I've done all of this work on a journey on myself, you know, so I completely get it. And I'm with your listeners. I really, and I think I get it more because I've had it. So I know exactly how it feels, you know.
Yeah.
And this has put me on this journey to explore all of this. So absolutely, anyone that can be helped, it's a privilege and a pleasure and an honor. So thank
The
you.
final message today is all three of us have been through breast cancer, and out of something bad has come something good. We've all gone on separate life paths, learned something new, and you know, there are good things that happen out of bad things.
Absolutely.
Thank
You girls are the silver lining. Oh, thank you.
Sumi.
Thank you for your time,
Thank
guys.
you. Brilliant.
Lovely.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Bye for now.
Bye.